Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a picture. And I don't mean a graph or a map or anything like that.
Right.
I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Unless you're driving, please keep your eyes on the road if you are. But visualize a cage. Just a standard iron bar bird cage sitting on a table.
It's a simple image, but it carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And inside this cage is a bird. It's been there a long time. Maybe it was even born there. It has its little swing, its water dish, its seed cup, all the comforts.
Right. The necessities are all provided.
And standing over the cage is a man. Now, in the movies, we kind of know how this scene goes. The man has a change of heart. He decides to be the hero, right?
Naturally.
He carries the cage out to this beautiful open meadow. The sun's shining, the wind is blowing through the tall grass. He opens the latch, he swings the little door wide open. Cue the swelling violins.
Freedom. It's
Got
the
it.
ultimate goal.
Yep. Right. We expect the bird to just burst out, spread its wings, maybe circle once to say thank you, and then soar off into the clouds. But in the source material we're covering today, which, by the way, is a pretty heavy stack of lectures and writings on the architecture of sovereignty by Allama Ghulam Ahmad Parvez, that is absolutely not what happened.
No, it's not. It's actually a horror story when you really look at it. It flips that whole Disney narrative completely on its head.
Yeah, it really does. The man opens the door, he steps back, and the bird, it panics. It doesn't look at the sky with longing. It looks at the man with absolute terror.
Right.
And then it throws itself against the bars from the inside, literally trying to pull the door shut with its beak.
It's such a visceral image. The bird isn't running from the captor. It's running from the freedom.
And the source describes this scene where the man actually shakes the bird out. Like he forces it into the air. And what does it do? It doesn't fly. It just drops to the dirt and it scrambles after the man. It chases the cage. It is begging, screeching to be put back inside.
Because to that bird, the cage isn't a prison. The cage is the universe. The cage is lunch. The cage is safety.
Yeah.
The open sky. That isn't freedom. That is a terrifying infinite void where you have to actually hunt for your own food, where there are hawks, where there is rain. It is the vast unknown.
This is what the sources call the caged bird syndrome. And the reason we are spending an hour on this today is because Parvez isn't talking about ornithology here. He is diagnosing the psychology of nations.
That is the absolute core of today's deep dive. He's arguing that you can liberate a people physically, you can break the chains, you can sign the Declaration of Independence, you can kick out the colonizers. But if their minds are still wired for the cage, they will chase after the tyrant.
Right.
They will democratically elect a new cage because the open sky scares them to death.
It is a genuinely terrifying concept. We always think of freedom as this universally desired state, like it's just a default setting for humanity.
We do.
But the source is arguing that the psychology of slavery and the psychology of freedom are two completely different operating systems. You can't just switch from one to the other overnight.
And that's why this deep dive is going to be a bit different from what you might expect.
Right.
We aren't looking at this through a traditional religious lens, even though the source material is deeply rooted in scriptural analysis of the Quran and the Torah.
Right. Yeah.
We are looking at this through what Parvez calls a systems-level analysis.
Can you unpack that distinction a bit for us? Because looking at the notes, I mean, there are a lot of references to Moses, Pharaoh, the Israelites. It feels very religious.
It uses the narrative of religion, certainly, but the analysis is fundamentally sociological. Parvez treats the story of the Exodus not just as a spiritual event or a miracle story, but as a historical case study, almost like a data set.
Okay, data set.
Yes, he is looking for the laws of rise and fall. He argues that there are mechanical sociological laws that govern how societies function, just like there are laws of physics that govern how gravity works.
So we're treating the story of Moses and the Pharaoh essentially as a blueprint for nation building.
Precisely. And specifically, a blueprint for why nation building fails. The mission statement of our exploration today is a core thesis that comes up again and again in these texts. Freedom is not a gift you receive. It is a capacity you build.
A capacity you build.
Yes, and if you don't build that capacity, you don't have the mental hardware for it, physical freedom is actually dangerous.
That is such a provocative thought, that freedom could be dangerous if you aren't ready for it. So to really get into this, we have to go back to one of the most famous stories in human history, the Exodus. Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt.
This is section 1 of our analysis, the anatomy of the slave mindset.
Okay, set the scene for us. Because in the popular version, the movie version, you know, everyone is cheering, they walk out of Egypt, the Red Sea parts, they cross over, and they are high-fiving. They are free. The bad guys are gone.
In the source material, the reality is much, much grimmer. You have a people who have been subjugated for generations. 400 years, according to the texts. That is a very long time.
Yeah, that's multiple generations knowing nothing else.
Exactly. That's not just a political situation. That breeds a sort of genetic memory of servitude. The source describes it as the self or the kudi having been slaughtered.
Cootie, that's a term we see in Iqbal's poetry too, right?
Yes, selfhood, dignity, the fundamental sense of I am. The pharaohs didn't just enslave their bodies. They crushed their kudi. They destroyed their capacity to view themselves as independent, sovereign agents.
Wow.
So Moses leads them out. They're standing in the desert. They're physically free. The whip is gone. The overseer is gone. But what is the very first thing they do? Do they write a constitution? Do they build a library?
No, they start a riot.
They complain.
hmm
And they don't just complain about the heat or the long walk. They complain about the menu.
The catering. And this is the part that really stopped me in my tracks when I was reading the notes, because they aren't asking for luxury. They're reminiscing about their life in Egypt, a life where their children were being killed, mind you, and they say, oh, remember the meat pots? We sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full.
It's selective memory driven by trauma. But look at the grocery list they actually cite. The source material highlights this specific verse very carefully. They miss the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic.
Okay, pause. Onions and garlic. That's what you're willing to trade your dignity for. I mean, I love a good garlic bread, but I'm not going back to literal slavery for it.
But you have to look at what those foods represent sociologically.
Hmm.
In the ancient world, and specifically in the Egyptian labor system, onions, garlic, and lentils were the fuel rations for the workforce.
Oh, I see.
They are cheap, they are durable, and they provide just enough energy to keep a human body moving for 12 hours of hauling stone.
So it's the slave diet.
Precisely. It represents the biological minimum. The slave mindset is completely obsessed with the biological minimum. It wants a life where the inputs are guaranteed. I show up, I move the bricks, you give me the onions, transaction complete.
Yeah, there's no ambiguity there.
Right. I don't have to worry about the rain. I don't have to worry about soil pH. I don't have to worry about securing trade routes.
Responsibility is zero.
Absolute zero. And that is seductive. Freedom, on the other hand, freedom is high risk. In the desert, there is no guaranteed onion ration. You have to find the water. You have to hunt the quail. If you fail, you starve.
So when they stood in that desert and looked at the horizon, they didn't see potential. They saw a broken supply chain.
And that terror completely overrides the desire for dignity. The source calls this the stomach overriding the soul. They were willing to put the chains back on just to hear the familiar clink of the seed cup. This is the caged bird turning around and running back to the man. Put me back in. I don't know how to hunt. I just want my guaranteed lunch.
That is depressing. But it gets worse. Because they didn't just complain about food. There's this critical moment in the narrative where they are brought to the edge of the Holy Land.
Right. And again, we really need to demystify the terms here. The source argues that in this sociological context,
Yeah.
the Holy Land wasn't just a religious shrine. It represented the establishment of a sovereign state.
Correct.
It represented the rule of law, territory, independence. Moses tells them, enter, take this land. It is yours if you strive for it.
And this is the moment of truth. This is where the rubber meets the road. And what do they say? They don't say, let's do this. They don't say freedom or death.
No. They give one of the most devastating responses in recorded history. They look at the land, they see that there are established tribes there, powerful people, and they turn to Moses. They say, there are powerful people in there, we aren't going in.
Right.
And then they drop the hammer. They say, you and your Lord go and fight, we will sit here.
You and your Lord go fight, we will sit here. That is just staggering moral cowardice. It's almost hard to wrap your head around it.
It's the ultimate abdication of agency. You do it for us. They viewed freedom as a spectacle to be watched, not a project to be built.
Like watching a movie.
Yes. They wanted a miracle. They wanted God to zap the enemies, clear the land, build the houses, stock the fridges, and then, only then, would they stroll in and take over.
And because that didn't happen, because they were told, no, you have to fight for it, they flat out refused.
And this provides the deep psychological insight the source emphasizes. A generation raised in subjugation loses the courage required for national defense. You cannot take a man who has spent his entire life bowing to a master and expect him to suddenly stand upright on a battlefield and fight for an abstract concept like sovereignty.
It's a muscle they don't have.
Exactly. His brain literally isn't wired for it.
Which brings us to the 40 years.
Yes, the wandering.
Now, growing up, or even just in pop culture, you hear about the 40 years in the desert as a punishment. God was angry because they refused to enter, so he made them walk in circles until they learned their lesson.
Right, that's the standard Sunday school narrative.
But Parway's analysis flips this completely. He says it wasn't punishment at all, it was a sociological necessity.
This is one of the most potent ideas in the material. Think about it structurally. You have a population of hundreds of thousands of people. They are all infected with this slave mindset. They are addicted to the onions and garlic. They are terrified of war. They are constantly looking back at Egypt. Can you build a nation with these people?
The source implies no, you actually can't.
You cannot. They are damaged goods, sociologically speaking. The source calls them infected. So what is the solution? If you can't fix their minds because the neural pathways of slavery are too deep, what do you do?
It sounds incredibly harsh when you say it out loud, but you have to wait for them to die.
That is the analysis, the filter theory. The 40 years weren't about distance. You can walk from Egypt to Palestine in a few weeks.
Right, it's not that far.
The 40 years were about time. Time for the old generation, the generation of the onions and the garlic, to naturally die out.
So the desert was essentially a graveyard for the slave mindset.
And a cradle for the free mindset. This is the second part of the equation, the school of nature.
Right, because while the old folks are dying off, a new generation is being born.
Exactly. And where is this new generation growing up? Not in the cities of Egypt, not under the whip of Pharaoh. They're growing up in the open desert.
The text mentions segregation, that the youth had to be segregated from the stagnant ideologies of the older generation.
Yes, they had to be insulated. The desert provided a harsh, unforgiving environment. The source compares it to a rigorous military training regime. Why do armies take recruits out of the city and put them in boot camps in the middle of nowhere?
To break old habits, to build resilience, to strip away the softness of civilian life.
Exactly. To forge character. The school of nature meant sleeping on the ground. It meant enduring hunger and thirst. It meant living without the civilization of Egypt. This hardship wasn't a punishment. It was the curriculum.
That makes so much sense.
It taught them discipline. It taught them bravery. It taught them that if you don't hunt, you don't eat. It taught them that if a lion comes, you don't look for a master to save you. You pick up a spear.
So by the time that 40 years is up, you have a completely different demographic. You have a nation of warriors who have never known a master. They have never bowed to a pharaoh.
Precisely. And that generation, the desert-born generation, was the one that marched into the Holy Land. They didn't say, you and your Lord go fight. They went and fought. They had the capacity for freedom.
It really highlights that core thesis. Freedom isn't a gift, it's a capacity. You have to be able to handle it. If you give a lottery winner $100 million and they don't have the financial literacy to manage it, they go broke in a year. It feels like the exact same principle on a national scale.
That is a perfect analogy. The first generation won the lottery of freedom, but they were spiritually bankrupt, so they couldn't invest it. They just wanted to spend it on onions. The second generation earned every penny of their character in the desert so they could actually build a state.
And this brings us to the most controversial and honestly the most biting part of the source material. Section 3, the parallel to Pakistan.
Yes. The lecturer, Allama Parvez, was writing and speaking in the context of the newly created state of Pakistan. And he doesn't pull any punches here. He pivots from ancient history directly to the modern state. And he asks a really uncomfortable question. Why is Pakistan struggling?
And his answer is deeply rooted in this Exodus model. He argues that there is a fundamental difference between how the second generation of Israelites got their freedom and how Pakistan got its independence.
He calls it the free gift critique.
Let's break that down carefully, because obviously 1947 was incredibly violent. There was mass migration. There was unimaginable death. It wasn't free in terms of human suffering.
Correct. And Parvez acknowledges the suffering. The text doesn't ignore the tragedy. But his argument is about the ideological preparation. He argues that the independence of Pakistan was, in many ways, achieved through a lawyer's debate.
Right.
He references Muhammad Ali Jinnah's brilliant legal and political battle within the British parliamentary system. Jinnah won the case for Pakistan.
But the source suggests that for the common masses, freedom came almost too easily compared to the blood-soaked ideological struggle that usually forges a nation.
Yes, that is the core distinction. He is saying there was no 40-year filter. There was no school of nature where the youth were segregated and trained for decades before getting the state. The British left, The lines were drawn, and suddenly a population that had lived under colonial rule for centuries and under other empires before that was just handed a sovereign state.
So the slave mindset was transferred directly into the new administration. The software didn't change, even though the hardware did.
That is exactly the argument. He says, look at the symptoms. Just like the Israelites complaining about garlic and onions, what did the citizens of the new state do immediately? They started complaining. Where is the electricity? Where is the water? Why are the rations low?
I've heard that sentiment. We're better off under the British. It's the good old days syndrome.
It is the exact echo of we were better off under Pharaoh. The source argues that because the self, or kuti, hadn't been reconstructed, the people viewed the state not as something to build, but as a new provider of goods.
Just swapping one master for another.
Precisely. They swapped a white master for a brown master,
Yeah.
but they remained servants in their minds. They expected the government to be the new pharaoh. A benevolent pharaoh? Maybe, but still a provider who hands out rations.
There is this linguistic point he makes here that I found really fascinating. The shift from hita to hita.
Oh, this is brilliant. It encapsulates the whole problem in one syllable. So in the scriptural narrative, the Israelites are told to enter the city and say, Hita.
Hita.
Hita means submission or humility to the law.
Mm-hmm.
It implies we are here to take responsibility and follow the rules.
Okay, so hita equals responsibility. We are ready to serve the state.
Right. But the source says they changed the word. They played a word game. Instead of Hita, they shouted Hinta.
And what does hinta mean?
Wheat. Grain.
Wow. So they were told to say, we accept responsibility, and instead they literally shouted, give us bread.
Exactly. They changed a doctrine of responsibility into a demand for free economic handouts. And the expert analysis in the source says this is the defining characteristic of a nation that hasn't broken the psychological chains of slavery.
Yeah.
They view the government as a vending machine. Put in a coin, get out Hinta. They don't view themselves as the engineers who have to actually build and maintain the machine.
It's a really powerful critique of the welfare mindset when it's entirely disconnected from contribution. It's the caged bird asking where the seed cup is instead of learning how to hunt.
And this leads us deeper into the system. Because if you have a population that is looking for handouts, they're also looking for miracles. They want magic. They don't want engineering. They want wizardry.
Right.
And the Force devotes a huge section to demystifying the miracles of the Exodus to show how a sovereign mind should think.
This is section 4, demystifying miracles. And I have to say, this is where the systems approach really shines. It completely reinterprets stories I thought I knew inside and out.
It requires a massive shift in perspective. The Source rejects supernatural magic in favor of rational cause and effect interpretations. It argues that the Quranic language is often metaphorical, describing sociological laws, not Harry Potter scenes.
Let's talk about the staff, the Asa. The classic image is Moses striking a rock with a wooden stick and water exploding out, magic wand style.
Right, but the source asks us to look at the etymology.
Huh?
The root of Asa comes from asabiya.
Kasabiya, that means social cohesion, right? Like community solidarity. I remember Ibn Khaldun talks about this as the force that builds empires.
Exactly, it's the glue that holds a community together. So when the text says, strike the rock with your Asa, the source interprets this not as hitting a stone with a stick, but as using the collective force of the community, your asabiya, to conquer the difficulty.
So the rock is the difficulty.
Yes. Striking the rock is a metaphor for hard labor. It's engineering. It's digging into the mountains to find water resources. It is saying, we are thirsty. Okay, we don't pray for rain and do nothing. We organize. We bring our pickaxes. We work together as a cohesive unit, and we force the earth to yield its water.
So it's not magic water. It's literally we dug a well.
It is we organized our labor force, we used our collective strength, and we engineered a solution. That is how nations rise. Not by waiting for a wizard to tap a stone, but by the sweat of their brow.
That empowers the human agent completely. But then, what about the 12 springs? The story says 12 springs gushed forth. Usually that's seen as a blessing. Look, God provided a spring for every single tribe.
And here is the twist. The source views the 12 springs as a disaster.
A disaster? How can water be a disaster in a desert?
Host, ask yourself, why do you need 12 springs?
Yes, so everyone has room to drink.
You need 12 springs because the tribes refuse to drink from the same water source. The tribe of Reuben wouldn't drink with the tribe of Simeon. The tribe of Judah demanded their own tap.
Oh, I see. They were so divided they couldn't even share water.
Exactly. It wasn't a miracle of abundance. It was a symptom of deep structural fracture. Each tribe demanded, where is my water? I'm not drinking with them.
The source calls this structural shirk.
Yes. Shirk, or polytheism, usually means worshiping idols.
Mm.
But the source defines it here sociologically as splitting the unity. If you set up competing authorities, competing factions, competing identities against the one unified law of God, you are committing shirk.
Wow.
The 12 springs represented the fragmentation of the nation.
That puts a completely different spin on it. Instead of celebrating the springs, we should be mourning the fact that they needed them in the first place.
It's a warning. If a nation cannot share a single water source, meaning a single economy, a single rule of law, a single national identity, it is doomed. It remains a collection of tribes, not a sovereign state. It creates a permanent state of internal chaos.
And speaking of chaos and doom, let's talk about the punishment. The Riz.
Riz.
Traditionally, this is translated as a plague sent from the sky. Lightning, pestilence, boils, that sort of thing. But again, the source goes straight to the dictionary.
The linguistic deep dive here is fascinating. The source notes that Riz actually refers to a specific pathology in camels.
Camels.
Yes, it's a disease where the camel's legs begin to tremble violently. The animal loses its stability. It cannot stand up. It just collapses under its own weight.
So the punishment wasn't a lightning bolt zapping them, it was a metaphor for a psychological state.
Exactly. The nation became like a trembling camel. They suffered from psychological paralysis. Due to their moral cowardice, their lack of cootie, and their dependence on slavery, they physically could not stand on their own feet. They collapsed.
That is such a vivid image, a nation that just shakes and falls over, because it doesn't have the internal skeletal strength to stand.
Yeah, and that ties perfectly back to the caged bird. A bird that has been in a cage too long, its wings atrophy, its muscles waste away. Even if you throw it in the air, it flutters and falls. It has the riz. It trembles and collapses.
So we have dissected the problem. We have the slave mindset, the refusal to struggle, the demand for free bread, the sectarianism, the psychological paralysis. It's a pretty bleak picture, but the source material also lays out the solution. It outlines what it calls the universal laws of rise and fall.
This is section 5, and this is where the system's approach becomes really prescriptive. It moves from diagnosis to cure.
The first law seems to be about the nature of God himself. The source asserts God is not a tribal deity,
This is a direct attack on the concept of the chosen people.
which both the historical Israelites and arguably modern Muslims suffer from heavily.
Right. The delusion is we are the special ones. We're God's children. We have the right label. Therefore, God is obligated to help us. He will send us manna. He will give us victory simply because we carry the right ID card.
And the source says absolutely not.
It says God is the Lord of all worlds, rebel element. He is entirely neutral. The source introduces the concept of mukafati amal,
Kukafati amal, what does that translate to?
the mechanism of action, or essentially returns on action. It means success is strictly a result of conduct, not identity.
Okay.
If you touch fire, you burn, whether you are a believer or an atheist. If you plant seeds, they grow, regardless of your theology. If you poison your own well, you die, even if you pray 5 times a day.
This leads to the distinction between physical laws and moral laws.
This is crucial to the whole architecture. To rise, a nation must follow both. Moral laws are things like justice, equity, compassion. But physical laws are science, organization, engineering, technology.
And here is the bitter truth the source mentions. It explicitly points to modern Israel.
Yes, it does. It asks a very blunt question. Why did the non-believers referencing modern Israel succeed in the exact same land where the believers failed?
And the answer is,
Because they mastered the physical laws. They turned the desert into a garden. How? Not by praying for rain and sitting in a mosque, but by drip irrigation, by agricultural science, by hard engineering. They struck the rock with the staff of science and labor.
while the believers.
While the believers relied on ritual, they treated salah, or prayer, as a hobby or a magic spell. They thought, if we just recite the right words, the crops will grow.
Yeah.
The source says no. That is a violation of the law of nature. You cannot pray for a harvest if you haven't plowed the field.
It's a devastating critique of ritualism without action. It's like trying to lose weight by reading a book about exercise while eating a donut.
Exactly. It's the difference between magic and method. The slave mind wants magic. The sovereign mind masters the method. The source is very clear. God helps those who follow his physical laws just as much as his moral laws. You cannot skip the science class and expect to pass the exam just because you are religious.
So this completely redefines what faith or iman actually means, because usually faith is defined as believing without seeing.
Completely redefined. In this architecture, iman is in blind belief in the unseen. It is defined as rational conviction. It is conviction based on evidence, or dalil. You look at the world, you understand the laws of cause and effect, and you align yourself with those laws. That is faith.
And true faith leads to infaq.
In fact, means spending or investing. It implies economic sacrifice for the future. It's the direct opposite of the free gift mentality. The slave asks, what can I get? Where is my hinta?
Right.
The person of Iman asks, what can I give to build the future? They don't wait for manna from heaven. They plant the seeds for the next generation. They invest in the open sky, even though it's scary.
So if we look at the architecture of sovereignty as a blueprint, what does it look like? Let's try to synthesize this for you, the listener. If you are building a nation or rebuilding one, what are the steps?
I think we can boil it down to 4 pillars based on these sources.
Okay, pillar 1.
Eradicate the psychology of the caged bird. You have to consciously destroy the fear of freedom. You have to teach people that dignity is worth more than onions. You have to prove to them that the cage is not safe. It is just a comfortable death.
Pillar 2.
Segregate and train the youth. Generational renewal. If the older generation is too far gone, if they're too addicted to the meat pots, you must protect the minds of the next generation. You have to put them in the school of nature. Give them challenges, not comforts. Don't spoil them. Let them struggle so they can build muscles.
Pillar 3.
Replace sectarianism with unity. Asabiya. No more 12 springs. No more my tribe versus your tribe. One water source. One law. One nation. You cannot survive if you are fragmented. You need to be a solid wall, not a pile of loose bricks.
And pillar 4.
Master the physical laws. Science, engineering, technology. You cannot build a sovereign state on prayer alone. You need power. You need to be able to stand on your own feet so you don't suffer the trembling of the weak camel. You need to control your own resources, your own defense, your own economy.
It's a really powerful, comprehensive worldview. It takes the mystical and makes it mechanical. It makes it actionable. It stops us from looking at the sky waiting for a miracle and tells us to look at the ground and start digging.
And it places the responsibility squarely on our shoulders. There is no one to blame but ourselves. If we are in the cage, it's because we are chasing it. If we are hungry, it is because we didn't plant. If we are weak, it is because we are divided.
That brings us to our final thought, the provocation we want to leave you with.
We've talked a lot about history and nations today, but I think this applies on a deeply personal level too. Freedom is terrifying. It requires constant vigilance. It requires risk.
It's easier to stay in the job you hate, but that pays the bills, the onions, and garlic, than to strike out on your own. It's easier to stay in a bad relationship because it's familiar than to be alone in the open sky.
It's easier to let someone else make the decisions. You and your Lord go fight. Rather than to take responsibility for your own life, it's easier to blame the government or the economy or your parents than to say, I am responsible.
So the question we want to leave you with is this. If you are unhappy with your current state, whether that's your country, your community, or just your own life, ask yourself honestly, are you unhappy because you are oppressed? Or is it because, deep down, you are still chasing the cage?
Where in your life are you waiting for a miracle when you should be picking up the pickaxe and striking the rock?
That is something to really chew on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.
We'll see you next time.